From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hello, everyone. Seen a lot of familiar faces, so thank you for coming again. This will be our third and final event that I have planned. If this is your first one that you've attended, I wanted to take a second to introduce myself. I'm a student from EKU, which is Eastern Kentucky University. My major is Deaf Studies and the ITP that we have. Political science is my minor, and so yes, I'm an interpreting student at Eastern. During my tenure at the library, I've hosted and planned 3 events. They're listed on the board. The first dealt with technology and how it influenced deaf culture in the deaf world. And then second, it was Divya Art. And then third, we'll be talking about preserving deaf culture. There will be a fourth that is not related to deaf culture, but it is another event. It will focus on my family heritage and lineage, which is of the Samoan culture. A congresswoman will be coming, and she will be a part of the event. Her name is Amata, and she will be coming during that presentation. For today, we invited Max Williamson. He used to actually be one of my teachers, and he moved to the DC area, and so very honored to have him come and to talk about his culture, his experience, and his community. Without further ado, Mr. Williamson.
Hello, so like she said, previously I was an employee at Eastern Kentucky University. I graduated from Gallaudet with my master's, and right now I'm on my track to get my PhD. I do work with a lot of deaf-blind consumers, and that is my specialty right now. So recently Michaela asked me if I would come and do a presentation and just kind of comment on how to preserve deaf culture. And I'm really honored to be here and meet many of you that have come today. So today's focus is going to be on how to preserve American deaf culture. And within that, I'm going to touch on a few subtopics as well, and we'll go through that as the presentation goes along. So many of you might be asking, what is deaf culture? And really, deaf culture consists of many different cultures. There's Black deaf culture, deaf-blind deaf culture, LGBT, and so there are many facets within deaf culture, but one thing that we all have in common is that we're deaf. So at the same time, the Black deaf community has their own language variances, as well as the deaf-blind community. So deaf culture can, in some ways, be very all-consuming. So right now you are going to have a chance to see George Veditz. This is his sign name. And I'm just going to show a short clip of it, about 1 minute, just so that you can kind of get an idea of what this looked like way back then. And this was recorded in 1913. It was the first time that ASL was ever recorded. So it's just going to be a short clip. So I actually made a mistake, sorry, it was on August 1913. I'm not sure if you can see it. Let's try to dim the lights. Is that any better? If you're curious about the video, you can access this link on Gallaudet's website. We were having problems before connecting it with the PowerPoint, but if you're interested in finishing the video, you can find that at Gallaudet. So the next slide, we're going to talk about the Milan Conference, and that happened in 1880 in Italy. And what this was there was a conference that decided that deaf language and community and culture would not be included in education. And so Veditz recorded this video to point out that we do need to preserve the language. And so that's why he recorded the video in 1913. And Veditz felt that a lot of the jobs that deaf individuals were holding were starting to be lost, and he predicted that eventually ASL would be gone. Sorry, I'm allowing the interpreter to catch up. So his purpose was to preserve it. So here you see a picture of Alexander Graham Bell, A.G. Bell, and you know him as the man who invented the telephone. But actually that was a mistake. After he was working with the Milan Conference and he agreed with oral education. He wasn't too supportive of sign language. Even Veditz talked about the oppression in his video, and so the suppression of sign language. And he felt that sign language was important and that it was a part of deaf culture and that it was something that needed to be continued. Alexander Graham Bell had a deaf wife, and she actually felt similar to A.G. Bell in supporting oral education. In fact, she herself was oral, and she thought that everyone else should be the same. So, NAD, the National Association of the Deaf, they did more historical research for A.G. Bell. And currently NAD is near Gallaudet University. So I just want to go back a little bit and mention Veditz, and that he's one of the grandfathers of deaf culture, as well as Laurent Clerc. And still to this day, they really affect deaf culture, and Laurent Clerc came from France, and then you see this development of sign language. And so the video that we showed, the language is a little bit different, and so it's similar to English in that as the language develops, you see some changes, and the influence of culture changes and advancements in technology and things like that. So we really do value both of them, both Veditz and Laurent Clerc. So how do we preserve culture? There's two ways. One, through advocacy with organizations such as NAD, the National Association of the Deaf. There's RID, and they do a lot of advocacy work with the deaf community, hard of hearing individuals. They're very supportive. DHH and Deaf and Hard of Hearing Commission are very similar. Each state has their own commission that works within the state, so those are very similar. So there's KCDHH, I think Texas has one, so each of the states has their own DHH. And then there's LEAD K. And that is Language Education Acquisition of Deaf Children. So you can also preserve through actions. If you notice, the first point is deafhood. And deafhood does collaborations and workshops, and they hold a lot of training events. And so they have two focuses. They focus within the community and sharing about deaf experience, and then they also have a more general focus on just educating people on deafhood. And now there's the Grassroots movement. DGM. Oh, there's a question. The question was, do you mind explaining what the Grassroots movement is? The Grassroots movement is based on people who are very immersed in deaf culture and who have experienced that oppression and autism throughout their deaf walk of life. And so this is now a formal organization that touches on all of their experiences. So the Grassroots is actually part of deafhood, and deafhood could be used as a general word to describe just the life of someone who's deaf and their deaf experience. And the Grassroots movement kind of shows that, you know, we might be deaf, but we have all of these skills and we're capable of doing a lot. And I actually put this one down a little bit wrong. And this one focuses on teaching ableism within the culture and promoting all of the things that we are actually able to do. And then these last two, I mean, these are very popular, they're used a lot, and I will expand on both the hashtag and the vlog in just a little bit. So, and these aren't all of the pathways to advocacy. There are many more ways to get involved, and you can do a lot more research and find many advocacy groups that are available. So here are a few things that I think would be helpful to know, and I just found a few pictures just to kind of explain each one. The picture over here on your left is a picture of the first deaf school that was established in America. It's called the American School for the Deaf. And it's in Connecticut. And then this one here on the bottom is a deaf club. And right now, unfortunately, we see a lot of deaf clubs closing, and there's not as much socialization. And then we notice also that a lot of the students aren't going to deaf schools. They're actually being mainstreamed, and then now we have the interpreter education programs and degrees. And then this picture up here on top is a picture of tactile signing, and that can be done with deaf-blind or deaf people who have a loss of vision or low vision. And it's another subset of language within the community.
It's still very prevalent.
And it's still prevalent today. So, and we have deaf-blind clubs as well, where they get together and share information and talk about advances in technology and things like that. And so there's a lot of different groups. There's a question from the audience. He will copy sign. So the question is asking about deaf clubs and how it's the comment on how there are not many in Maryland. And DC because now they have happy hours. So happy hours are like a get-together, right? So we do see the closure of deaf clubs, and they're just kind of disappearing. But the language and the culture is still prevalent. It still exists. And so you see this switch of focus to maybe happy hours in bars or restaurants, things like that, different establishments around the DC area. But those are still places that deaf individuals can gather, as well as provide exposure to people who are hearing and haven't seen sign language. They now see people signing at a table, and that provides a source of interest for them to learn or to possibly join in. And then we can kind of expose them to our language and our culture and show them that this is something that's worth preserving. And we really do tend to welcome people into our culture in that way.
So what happens when deaf culture is preserved? You know, we can have kind of a forward-looking view on this. Right here, a lot of people know, or before I mentioned Lead K, Niall DeMarco, he's involved with Lead K and major advocate of children and language and culture exposure at an early age. So we see a lot of advocacy. He's from, in California, they recently passed a law that required language acquisition for students that were deaf, and that they would, it was about a month ago. And all of these people they had a collaborative effort to all work together. Niall, he won America's Next Top Model, and we had such a great exposure to ASL and to culture at that time. Now he's on the other show, Dancing with the Stars, and that's the continued exposure that, no, the language is not gone and that the advocacy still exists. And so they did pass that law, and he was an advocate of that bill that was passed. And Iowa as well passed a piece of legislation. We had a question, who was that? That's Niall, and he has a sign name. So the comment from the audience was that Niall DeMarco is his name. There is a foundation that was just established, and he set that up that would provide resource and materials for people, for hearing individuals, to how to work with people that are deaf and students. Similar to how A.G. Bell had written an article about he was hearing who decided how education should happen for individuals that are deaf, and that we would see a decrease in the language and exposure. But now, Niall has spoken in opposition of that. He's signing on TV, he's signing in the media, and along with his foundation, shows the importance of the preservation. So, and he is the modern day Veditz, and that deaf children with hearing parents, that we should encourage them to sign. It's the same with deaf parents who have hearing children, that the more and more that we expose them to this language, and that the language, that they can succeed in the same ways. So it's the preservation of the culture and the preservation of the language. So a lot of A.G. Bell had disseminated some incorrect information about the importance of making sure that we do keep this language alive. So these are just more and more news, and there's the guy in the corner called Mothman. We have iNews, deaf publications, and we're seeing a lot more and more of this, of the education and the information sharing that's happening because of the integration of social media and its true takeoff in our society. You know, we have Facebook, Twitter, vlogs, and as I had mentioned vlogs before, that we're making sure that the language there is able to be kept. And it's not disappearing. Because we have our online resources, we're able to teach children and have them exposed to a wide range of language and a wide range of styles of language. We have Deaf Nation. They have different events that happen and booths all set up. They're open to the public. People are all welcome to come and see the culture. So people are like, they want to see what's new in the world, what's up and coming, and that's at Deaf Nation, the expos. Also, deaf art. There are deaf artists that use the language to represent art. So being able to see some of the language meshed with art is a great way to really showcase the beauty of the language. So before we talked about hashtag, and that's the new thing that's coming up, there's one that's hashtag why I sign. There's another one, hashtag dancing with the stars. And right, the audience member said, yeah, there is a hashtag AGB for A.G. Bell. So before I had talked about A.G. Bell, how he wrote a very negative, there was a negative article written from the foundation that was sent out. And so there was a hashtag there where people were speaking in opposition, trying to get the message back to the foundation that this is not the current climate and the environment in which we want the language to disseminate. And so we're looking around seeing, wow, all of these people that are deaf that are using sign language. So because of social media and the technological advances, we really are able to spread our message. So in historical mindset, we had Veditz, and then now we have hashtags and vlogs in a way to preserve the culture and language. I have some other comments and some other stories, but if anybody from the audience wanted to share, I said, yeah, a member of the audience said, could you describe about deaf schools and deaf education and what happened in Iowa and New Mexico as well? Some of these schools are being closed. Do you mind to talk about that? yeah, we're noticing a lot of deaf schools and a lot of deaf school closures, as well as the decrease in numbers. So people are trying to figure out, how do we keep them from closing? How do we stress the importance of these institutions? And that with Lead K and other advocacy groups, we're able to document and support through justification the need to keep these schools. And it's important to keep, in New Mexico actually, they are fighting, they're fighting it right now. Pennsylvania School for the Deaf, there's some issues with the president, and in Pennsylvania they have a superintendent, and there's some issues there with the politics of how the school is being ran. And understand this is not just a domestic issue. We're seeing it in Canada as well, and across borders we're seeing it in Portugal, and there's a lot of deaf oppression that's happening worldwide. Coming from the audiences, how about Sweden? Have you heard anything about Sweden? Yeah, in Sweden there are some people that are experiencing oppression. There was a videotape. Something had happened many years ago, that there was a big building, and because of funding, they had bought it to replace and demolish the deaf school. But there saw some socialization issues with the deaf students. Hang on one second while he's getting the audience comment. At deaf schools, there were hearing teachers in Sweden. Yeah, a lot of that is happening in Sweden. Seeing a lot of decrease in numbers of deaf students in deaf schools. So yes, that is a way to share information. It's a way that Sweden has been looking at some of our structures and our systems in here of how to use us as a model for their school systems. So yeah, he had just mentioned before about mainstream schools, which are just the general public schools, and a lot of hearing parents have a predilection to put their deaf children into schools. They just think that communication, they'll have an interpreter, so it should be fine. But we're seeing now that a deaf school is the best place. It has the immersion, and it's the best place for language acquisition. Communication at a mainstream school will have to be facilitated through an interpreter most of the time. And at those schools, they're not learning the cultures. They're not having that insemination. But at deaf schools, they do have this. They have the deaf clubs. They're able to graduate and learn and really feel that they're a proud deaf person and to have the language and culture inside of them. They don't feel dismissed from society. And as well as the language, they're still able to acquire and to keep. So now, again, I will stress the importance of social media and what its takeoff has meant. Technology and what it has done for the language, that we're forever able to keep it with us.
I have a question about deaf culture.
Stand up inside.
It's about the content of deaf culture. I was trained to be a cataloger at GPO when I worked at GPO by a deaf cataloger. And there was no interpreting services there at the time. And I had a wonderful experience learning from her. And I came to, afterwards, I wondered, why was this training so good? And I came to understand that hearing people like to talk a lot. And there's a lot of BS. And this is my question as an outsider, and I realized that she taught me in a way where her words were very important and very short and concise. So my question is, as a hearing person, if I would listen to deaf poetry, for example, or deaf comedy, would it be something that would be more compressed or shorter in content, if you understand my question?
Yeah, maybe ask it again in a different way. Yeah, if that's okay, ask it again.
Okay. My experience learning from a deaf teacher as a hearing person was that she was very concise and to the point. Very little BS. And I'm wondering if I went to a deaf cultural event like deaf comedy or deaf poetry, whether the expression would be that same way, more concise and shorter in terms of its content.
Okay, so you think that maybe like deaf culture in the deaf language is more concise and to the point?
I don't know.
On it- on its own?
I don't know.
Okay, sure. The language is structured differently. There are different grammatical rules and everything than in English. So it does tend to start out with the point, and then it's explained. So what is the point? Expansion, talk about what it is, and then summarize the point. But in terms of comedy and poetry, there are some very specific and idiosyncratic portions of that that we can see that English has, but to interpret between them is different. So the cultural part, understand that deaf typically are more direct, blunt, and to the point, whereas hearing try to kind of obfuscate a little bit, maybe, skirt around the question or the point. It's like, oh, deaf person, wow, it looks like you've gained weight. So there could be that as well. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I noticed the deaf community here is very blunt and to the point.
Yes. Yeah, and the point isn't to insult or to be rude. It's just to, it doesn't offend us. It's just kind of, in the deaf community, when we socialize with hearing people, they'll look at us like, whoa, that was way too blunt, way too direct. But it's really just part of our culture, and that we communicate and interact with each other. Hearing people, they understand me totally fine. Or with the things that I might say to other deaf, they could take it in a much better way than when I communicate with my hearing cohorts. Do you mind to have people come up? So yes, if you have a comment, please come up to the front, because this is being recorded, and so it's easier for the camera to see. So we had just mentioned before about the preservation of language, and why do we cherish the language? I think before, let's back up for a little bit and talk about a child that is born deaf to hearing parents. They don't have sign language. So they're obviously going to be on a language delay. And we want these deaf children to be able to acquire their language. That's why they have to start signing at an early age. We had mentioned that there was the new law that was passed, that immediately at a hospital, a baby has to go through a hearing test, and they will be screened for hearing. That way they can find what is the best modality to expose them to language at an early age. Often, hearing parents, they have hearing children. It's not a problem. Hearing children have language acquisition because of their hearing parents, and they're able to share the same language. If they don't understand something, they can cry. The hearing parents are able to realize that there is some type of communication with them. We have started to see that they're signing, hearing parents are signing with their hearing babies, some of the basic signs, because they're seeing that communication can happen easier that way. So it's another reason why we cherish and want to preserve our language. Right, thank you for that. It really is about the language. There is one videotape that I had seen that juxtaposes two children being raised in an environment. One is exposed to sign language and the other is not. We see the success that graduate, have a job, and are able to take off, while the other one continues to struggle. And that video really emphasizes the importance of early language exposure. So any other questions? Any comments? So, thank you. This is the last event that we had, but this is our last brown bag. And if you would like to come, everybody goes upstairs and we can eat together and continue to socialize. You're welcome to come and join our table that everybody signs. So thank you, everybody, for coming and supporting the last events that I've had. This is the third. And LCDA was a sponsor of this, so thank you very much. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to go up and ask a deaf person that you work with.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.